Okay, so let's go over yesterday's Gemara. The Gemara that we learned yesterday was discussed the question that the Gemara asks: why can't we include the Havdalah in Havinenu? Why can't we do that? Let's include it. You could add a few words in the Havinenu bracha. And the Gemara doesn't answer it. It says kasha. And we did mention the Talmud Rabbeinu Yoina in the back, the Gemara, that it gives an answer that if you would include the Havdalah, it would give the impression that it's a bracha in its own right. And it really isn't. It's only part of the Atochenin bracha. But the Gemara doesn't answer it. It doesn't prove it wrong. It just doesn't answer. It just says kasha. Basically, you cannot recite Havinenu on a Saturday night or on a Motzei Yom Tov, the end of Yom Tov. You cannot recite it because you need to include the Havdalah, and it's not part of the Havinenu. So that's the Gemara that was the discussion that we mentioned from the commentary that wants to answer the Gemara's question. Because the Gemara doesn't disprove it, it just ends off kasha. Therefore, there's room to come up with an answer. And so Rabbeinu Yoina comes up with that explanation that it's together with all the other blessings of the Shemona Esrei in the Havinenu bracha, but yet it's not a bracha of its own right. So it gives the wrong impression. And the way I once heard a shiur was explained that what it means is that if a person will make a mistake and recite it as a bracha in its own right when they do say the full Shemona Esrei on a Saturday night. So therefore, we don't include it in the Havinenu. Now, the next Gemara mentioned that there is a law of certain additions that we add for rain. And we add two additions for rain. One addition is more of a praise to God, and we praise Hashem about the rain in the rainy season. And the other is a request for rain. And it's interesting because there is a discussion about praising Hashem for rain on Sukkot. One opinion says we should start praising Hashem for rain in the beginning of Sukkot. The other one says, what do you mean? If it rains on Sukkot, it's going to be awful. It's like it's a symbol that Hashem is angry at us. If it rains in the Sukkah, so we're going to mention praise Hashem for rain during Sukkot. And the other rabbi says, well, we're not asking for rain. We're only praising Hashem for the rain. But ultimately, the conclusion of the halacha is that we do not ask rain for rain. We don't mention rain until after the end of Sukkot, the last day, Shmini Atzeres, when in Israel, they're not even in the Sukkah. And here, outside of Israel, we're still in the Sukkah, the final day. That's when we ask Hashem, that's when we mention praising Hashem for rain. It's called Mashiv HaRuach U'Moreh Geshem. We praise Hashem saying Hashem lowers down rain. Hashem lets it rain. So it's a praise for Hashem. Mashiv HaRuach, he makes the wind blow. And U'Moreh Geshem lets the rain fall. So we do a praise for Hashem on Shmini Atzeres. But we don't really ask Hashem for rain until when? Until the Jewish people get back home well, in Israel, they wait till the Jewish people get back home from after they were visiting the Beis Hamikdash. So they start asking for rain on Zayin Cheshvan, the 7th day of Cheshvan, which is maybe about 2 weeks, approximately 2 weeks after Sukkot. That's how long it took for people to get back to their houses after they would do the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So in Israel, they wait till then. We wait to ask for rain until December 4th or 5th, depending on the if it's a leap year or not a leap year, a secular leap year. So that is the that's when we start asking Hashem for rain. Now, the Gemara is discussing what happens if a person forgot to mention rain or mention God's praise for rain or ask Hashem for rain. And what happens if you forgot that? So on that, the Gemara that we learned said that I'm sorry, I'm jumping to the next Gemara. Before I mention that, let me first. There was a different Gemara that I skipped. The other Gemara was that on the time for rain, a whole year round, a person can say Havinenu, but just like you can't say it on Saturday nights, you also can't say it in the time that we ask Hashem for rain because it's not part of the Havinenu, and you really need to ask Hashem for rain during those parts, during that season, and therefore you would not be allowed to recite the Havinenu bracha, let's say in America, from December 4th. You wouldn't be allowed to recite the Havinenu from that time until Pesach, because this is a time we're supposed to ask for rain. In the Havinenu, there's no mention of asking Hashem for rain, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to say Havinenu. So again, when can you not use this abridged version of Shemona Esrei? So you cannot use this abridged version on Saturday night, the night after Yontiv, and you can't use it when you need to ask Hashem for rain. Again, the Gemara asks a similar question that it asked for Havdalah. It says, so why can't you add a few words? Mention it. And the Gemara answers that a person will get confused. And the Gemara says, what about Havdalah that we said over there that we ended a kasha? Why don't we say the reason you don't add Havdalah in the Havinenu is also so a person will get confused. My answer is no, there it's in the beginning. You won't get confused. Here, if we tell you to add the few words for rain, it'll be confused. It'll be confusing. You'll lose your place. Basically, we're not going to include it. And the Gemara asks, why don't you include it at the end? Then people won't get confused. If you include it at the end, it's basically the complicated wording of that prayer is over. So you're not going to get confused. So why can't you just include it at the end? And we know that you are allowed to include it at the end. And that's where what I was mentioning earlier comes in. If you forget to ask for rain in the fifth middle blessing, where you're supposed to ask for rain, there is an option. There is a plan B that you're allowed to include the rain request at the end of your Shemona Esrei requests in the bracha called Shemea Tefillah. So there's a blessing that's asking Hashem to listen to our prayers, and in that blessing you could add the words V'sein Tal Umater. Hashem should give rain. And so the question is, why don't we include it in the Havinenu part where it ends, Baruch Hashem Shemet Tefillah, right there, right before there. Add the request for rain, just like you would do it in a regular Shemona Esrei. So maybe that should work. And we know that if you miss it, you're allowed to catch it up then. And the Gemara answers that the reason why we don't include it in the Havinenu is because that only works. To add it at the end only works if you made a mistake. By mistake, you can add it at the end. You can't initially include the Havinenu, the request for rain at the end. The request for rain has to be done in the initially the proper place for it is in the middle of the Shemona Esrei, which would be in the middle of the Havinenu, and there you're going to get confused if we add some extra words there, and therefore it's not included in the Havinenu. It's interesting. I put together a little prayer booklet for the nursing homes because for the last 17 years I've been servicing many tens of nursing homes and assisted livings in the two counties that I cover, Dade and Broward County, and go to all the facilities and try to provide them with some Yiddishkeit. So I put together a little prayer booklet, and I wrote a Havinenu translation for them. And I wrote on it that you cannot recite that. This is only usable. You can only recite it when it can't be used during the winter, from December 4th till Pesach. But otherwise, this can be recited 3 times a day, because it was specifically written for people who are not capable of reciting a 10-page Shmoneh Esrei, but and they don't have the attention span. So I put together this little page that has the Havinenu in it, and so hopefully people use it. I don't know. I've given it out. Anyway, yes, Robert.
That's great to know. If it's in a PDF form, can you email it to those of us who would like it for reference?
Yeah, but I just want to give a disclaimer that it's really not acceptable for someone who's not in a facility.
No, I understand that. Yeah,
Okay.
no. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because I do have friends who are in nursing homes.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know how they're connected. So if you would not mind, send one to me,
sure.
or whomever else would like to have. You
Yeah.
do a great, of course you do mitzvot all the time, and this is one more effort. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So yesterday I mentioned that if a person is overwhelmed, we do not give a permissible license for someone to use the Havinenu, because we believe nowadays most people don't have full concentration even when they recite Havinenu or when they recite the Shmoneh Esrei, and therefore there's you cannot recite Havinenu because of concentration, because a person feels they're not going to be able to concentrate the entire Shmoneh Esrei, so therefore they could recite a Havinenu. We don't say that, but in this scenario for the nursing homes, it's not just concentration that they wouldn't have. It's simply that the ability for them to read 10 pages. It's just not. I just see it not being possible, and this is possible. And I did see also that or at least I've heard that there's a Aruch HaShulchan, one of the codifiers of Jewish law, mentions that although we don't say Havinenu, but we should give the Havinenu prayer to soldiers. He says that soldiers should have it because they're on the run. They should at least have the Havinenu. So while he's mentioning in the same sentence that we don't recite nowadays the Havinenu prayer, and as we saw, the Gemara said that Abaye cursed those that said Havinenu. Nevertheless, it should be used, he said, for people who are like soldiers and they're in a rush, and they should have it. So it does seem like there is room for Havinenu, even though, as I showed you yesterday, the Bir Halacha says nowadays it's traditional not to. And I also mentioned yesterday that that if the time constraints, if the time is up to daven, and you only have 1 minute left, in Shmoneh Esrei it takes 3 minutes or 5 minutes, and you only have 1 minute left, a person, the Mishnah Berurah whole paskins, that person should say the Havinenu bracha. So it's not like it's totally not usable nowadays. It is usable. It's just rare. It's very rare. On rare occasions, a person should have. It's interesting. None of the Siddurim, none of the prayer books really have the Havinenu prayer in it. At least the ones I know. Yeah, maybe the Sephardic. I'm sure Ezra is going to tell me the Sephardic one does.
The Rinat Yisrael that's put out from Israel does
have
it. Yes.
Okay. All right, now I should also mention Tosfos on the top of the page mentions that even though Abaye cursed those that recite that say the Havinenu, but Tosfos says there are in some texts it says that's only applicable in a city, but if a person's on the road, then there is a source to say Havinenu, which is from the beginning of our tractate. There was a story about a person was entered into a chorva, which is there was a rabbi who entered into this. I don't even know how to translate a chorva, like a spooky house or something, like ruin,
Ruins.
and because of that, he endangered himself. And so Eliyahu Hanavi met him and said, "You should not have done this. You should have recited the Havinenu prayer." And so what we see is that there is a source that a person on the road should say Havinenu. So Tosfos here is basically telling us, even though again the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch later on, way after Tosfos, they've told us that nowadays people don't have kavanah. But what we see is, even though Abaye cursed someone and told someone off for saying Havinenu, that was because that's not the norm. It shouldn't be normally used. But if a person was on the way and they couldn't have kavanah, then they would have been allowed to do the Havinenu even after Abaye cursed the person who says Havinenu. It only applied to people who were trying to take life, do things easier and make life easier for themselves. And really, it's not something a person should rely on unless they're in such a situation that needs it. Okay, so that was the Gemara, and we're now about 5 lines up from the bottom. Gufa. 6 lines up from the bottom of the page, on page 29a. 29a, 6 lines up from the bottom. Gufa Amar Reb Tanchum. Gufa means it was just mentioned. We just learned this following statement. Amar Reb Tanchum, Amar Reb Asi. Reb Tanchum said in the name of Reb Asi, Ta'av lehiskir gvuras kashamin. If a person made a mistake and he forgot to mention and include the few words that praise Hashem for the strength of the rain, which is in specific words are Mashiv Haruach Umerid Hakeshem. Hashem who blows the wind and brings down rain. If a person forgot that, B'tchias Hamesim, in the blessing of Tchias Hamesim, the second blessing of the Shemona Esrei after Magen Avraham, the second blessing is Tchias Hamesim, Machaya Hamesim. So in that blessing, in that paragraph, there's a point where we're supposed to add Mashiv Haruach Umerid Hageshem. And if a person forgot that, the law is Machzirin Oisoi. He has to go back. We make him go back he has to go back and repeat the Shemona Esrei, depending on where he is, but if he forgot it and he's much further on, he would have to go all the way back. If it's not so much further on, he can maybe just go back to the beginning of that bracha. Yes, Robert.
But it also says, the powers of the rain in the blessing of the resurrection of the dead.
Right, that's the blessing. That's the place where it's put.
Okay,
it's in that blessing. I used the Hebrew for Machaya Hamesim.
Okay, all right.
But that means it does mean the resurrection.
Of the dead. Okay,
that's
good.
the blessing. That's the second blessing of the Shemona Esrei. It's Machaya Hamesim, and so that is where you include this Gvuras Kasham. So if a person forgot it, Machzira Noisa, we make him go back. She'ela beberchas hashanim. If he forgot to put in the request in the blessing of Berchas Hashanim, which is the blessing right after Rifa'ena, right after healing, is the blessing for sustenance and the produce. That blessing is called the Berchas Hashanim, the blessing that God blesses the years. And so that blessing, Hashem should bless this year. Baruch Aleinu. Hashem Aleinu Hashanah Azois. Okay.
The 10 Talamata.
And the words are the same Talamata. Thank you. So if a person forgot that, Ein Machzira Noising. We do not make him go back. So the surprising thing is that he's asking for rain. Why would he not go back? You're supposed. This is the time to ask for rain, and you don't make him go back. So the answer is that he can make it up. When can he make it up? In the Shemaya Tefillah. Can include it in the request of Shemaya Tefillah. So when a person does the ki ata shemea tfilas kol peh, right before the word ki, you could include b'sein talu mater or b'sein talu mater levracha. You could include that there because you can include personal requests there. So you're able to make it up. You don't have to go all the way back to Baruch Aleinu. You could just include it there. So that's the law about the request for rain. B'sein talu mater. Now, v'havdalah b'chein adas ein machzir. Havdalah, if a person forgot it in the blessing of Chein Adas, he does not have to go back. Because he could say it, he will say it. He can say it with a cup of wine when he recites Havdalah. In other words, he's going to recite a Havdalah on a cup of wine. He doesn't need to go back to the repeat Shemona Esrei or go back to the earlier place in the Shemona Esrei. You forgot Ato Chein Antanu, you're fine. You're going to say it later in the Havdalah. Now, the Gemara says something's wrong here because we have another place where it says that if you forget to ask for rain, the same talu mater, you do have to go back. So our Gemara said, we just learned Reb Tanchum in the name of Rav Asi said, if you forget requesting rain, you can make it up in the blessing of the Shemea Tefillah, that blessing. That blessing is the 16th blessing of the Shemona Esrei, and you could make it up in the 16th blessing. So you missed it in the in the 8th blessing. You make it up in the 16th blessing. So the Gemara here now brings a source, a brisa that says you can't make it up. Meisvei, they asked a contradiction. If a person made a mistake, he forgot to mention the Mashav Aruch Murder Geshem. He forgot to mention the praise of Hashem that He gives rain. B'tchias hamesim, in the blessing, the second blessing of Shemona Esrei called Tchias hamesim. In that blessing, he forgot Machzir Naisei. He has to go back. She'ela b'Berachos Hashanim. If he forgot to put in the request for rain in the Berachos Hashanim, Machzir Naisei. He's got to go back. And this is the main point, that he's got to go back. You can't make it up in the Shemea Tefillah. This is a contradiction to what we just learned. Because before we learned that you can make it up in the Shemea Tefillah, in the 16th blessing, you can make it up and ask there for rain and put in your request the same talu mater. May you, Hashem, please give tal, dew, umater, and rain. We could put it in the Shemea Tefillah. When you say, Hashem, please listen to my prayer, you could say over there that please give me rain and give us rain. And in here, it says that you can't do that. If you forget it in Berachos Hashanim, Machzir, you got to go back. What happens if you forgot Ato Chein Antanu, you forgot to say the Havdalah on Saturday night, or after Yontiv, you forgot to say the Havdalah in the Shemona Esrei, in the Chein Hadas blessing, in the 4th blessing, that you ask Hashem for knowledge. In that blessing, what happens if you forgot the Ato Chein Antanu? You don't have to go back because you could say it in the Havdalah on the wine. So because you're going to make it up, you're going to be able to say it on the wine, you don't have to go back there. But what we did say was, you do have to go back if you forgot to ask for rain. What about the previous opinion that we mentioned earlier? It said that you can make it up in the 16th bracha of the Shemona Esrei. And here it says, no, you got to go back. So the Gemara answers like Kasha. The Gemara is going to give an answer and then it's going to prove it wrong. But the answer the Gemara gives is like Kasha, it's not a Kasha. There's a difference if you're an individual or you are a congregation. If you are in a congregation, you're davening in a congregation, you forgot, so you will be able to listen to the chazan and it's good enough. But if you're just davening on your own, then you're going to have to go back. So that's the Gemara's initial answer to the contradiction. Again, contradiction was one place says you can make up what you missed out later on. In the other place, it says you can't make it up. And the Gemara's answer is that why one place you can't make it up, you got to go back. That's because you're davening alone. The other place you make it up because you're going to hear it from the chazan. Now the problem is that doesn't fit the words. The Gemara is going to ask that. But let's first explain let's first get the answer. So the Gemara says, Loi kasha, we're 2 lines up from the bottom of the page, 29a, 2 lines up from the bottom of the page. Loi kasha, it's not a question. Habi yachid, habi tzibor. There's a difference. This is talking about if you're davening alone. This is talking about if you're davening with a congregation. The tzibor, if you're with a congregation, by time of what is the reason, Loi, that you do not have to go back and go either back to that bracha or start over Shemona Esrei. If you finish the whole Shemona Esrei, you would have to start. Why don't you have to do that? Mishum deshama mitzlech tzibor, because you're going to hear it from the chazan, from the cantor. And since you'll hear it from the cantor, you'll fulfill your obligation by hearing it from the cantor. So the Gemara says that, but by an individual, you're davening alone, you're going to have to go back because you missed out. The Gemara asks, does it fit the words? If so, we said the reason why you don't have to go back is because you can make it up in the later blessing, Shemat Tefillah, the 16th blessing. Why does it say that? It should say because you're going to hear it from the chazan. It should say because you are going to hear it from the chazan. That's why you don't have to go back. Not because you're going to make it up later. It's because you're going to hear it from the chazan. So this is obviously not the right answer. Ella edi v'edi b'yachad. Rather, we must in both cases we're talking about, you're davening alone. And one place you have to go back if you miss out asking for rain. In the other place, it says you don't have to go back if you miss out asking for rain because you could catch it up. You could include it later on in the 16th blessing. How do you reconcile this contradiction? But like kasha, and it's not a question. It's very simple. This one is when you idkar, you remembered before Shemei Tefillah, before the blessing, the 16th blessing. In the other case, we now turn the page, 29b, everyone, 29b. Idkar basar Shemei Tefillah. This is where you remembered after you already recited the Shemei Tefillah blessing, so you will missed out your opportunity to make it up and to catch up, and therefore you got to go back. Now, this is the conclusion of this Gemara, that regarding the request for rain, if you miss it out, you really should include it in the Shemat Tefillah, and you won't have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. If you ended the Shemona Esrei and you forgot it, and you never included it in the Shemat Tefillah, you will need to go back and repeat the Shemona Esrei. Yes, David.
Yeah, the idea of listening to the chazan is not going to help you by Marav.
Right, true. That's true. Okay, good point. Very good point. Honestly, I don't think we follow that opinion that you can anyway, even if shachris. I don't think we follow that you can hear it from the chazan. In other words, that's not the conclusion of the Gemara, really. And although there's room to say that doesn't contradict the conclusion of the Gemara, but I think the final halacha is we don't rely on the chazan, and the person would have to repeat the Shemona Esrei even if he davened in shul. If he didn't remember. If he didn't remember for Shemat Tefillah, he would have to, and he finished the Shemona Esrei, he'd have to go back. Now, I will mention this. There is a discussion. Let's think about this. You're supposed to recite it in the 8th bracha of the Shemona Esrei. No, the 9th bracha. Right? 3, and then chaynein. 9th bracha. So you're supposed to say it in the 9th bracha, asking for rain. If you miss it, you can say it in the 16th bracha. In the 16th blessing, you could include it. What happens if you missed it in both? So now you got to go back. Where do you go back to? Do you go back to the 16th bracha, Shemei Tefillah, and just add it there? Or do you go back to the Barech Aleinu, the 9th bracha? You have to go all the way back, like 5 pages back, but then you just go 2 pages back. In other words, do you have to go back to the way it's supposed to be said preferably, or can you make it up where, after the fact, you sort of can make it up there. So maybe you could go back to that place as well, which is maybe just a page or 2 pages behind. But you have to go back like 5 pages from the Shemoneh Esrei and go all the way back to the 9th bracha. So this is a discussion among the commentaries, the Rishonim. The commentaries deal with this. But the halacha is that you go back all the way 5 pages. You got to go all the way back to Barech Aleinu, the blessing, the ninth blessing. But it is discussed, and there are opinions that you could just go back to the 16th blessing. Yes, Susan.
I just want to ask a quick question.
Yeah.
Are you talking about when someone is davening from a prayer book, or on the oral that they're just what they recite, what they remember?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the truth. It sounds good, like what you're saying. It would be nice that if you daven with a prayer book, you never forget anything, but that's not so. Even if you daven with a siddur, you will make mistakes, and you'll forget this and forget that. You forgot to include this. That's the way it works.
Okay.
So it's a good thought. It would be nice.
In other words, you accidentally skip a line or skip a section because of kavona, right?
Right. Well,
You're so intense on your prayers.
I'm not sure that's why you're forgetting. No, people drift off and people forget things. I mean, anything could be. So I'm just telling you, it has nothing to do with saying it inside or out, but it does help. If you say it inside, you're right. It definitely helps that you won't forget. It helps, but it's not a perfect answer. Some people are forgetful. Okay. So
Rabbi,
that's the, yes.
Do you ever take into, when you're praying for rain, do you ever take into consideration whatever the current weather conditions are? Like some places that are having, if you're having torrential rain or hurricanes, do you pray and ask for rain then? Because you've got more than you want?
Right. So the thing is, our prayer for rain is really praying for rain in Israel.
Hi, this is another baby. This is Esther's.
Looks like we've got someone competing over here. The prayer for rain is really rain in Israel, and if a person lives in a place that needs rain, they would include that in the Shemei Tefillah blessing. You would include it really in the Shemei Tefillah bracha. Okay, so we're going to continue with the next piece of Gemara. Amar Rav Tanchon, Amar Rav Asi. So we're on the top of the
printed books for 500 years.
I can't hear you. Say that again.
Saying, Rebbe, that we've only had books for 500 years.
Right.
And before that, there was 2,500 years of dealing with this. So the idea of having a sefer in your pocket is a very new thing.
Right. Okay. I still think people forget, even if they use a siddur. There's numerous times I've been asked from congregants if they have to repeat the Shemoneh Esrei and so on, and I think they've used.
I forget which Rav who said when you come back from Shemon, when you finish Shemoneh Esrei, you should really do Tefillas Haderech.
Right. Yes, David.
I was going to say in reference to what Susan's saying, so one of the things that we're asking for when we're asking for rain is that it should be for blessing and not for the opposite. So there's rain that comes as a blessing thing, and it waters the fields. And then there's a blessing. Then there's the opposite where it comes in downpours there where it can be dangerous. So we're asking for rain that it should be in a blessing way, not in the opposite way of a curse, God forbid.
And you should send a video of the New York City subways from this morning.
Okay. Well, we're not, but that's the news. The news, Kylo. We're gonna continue on the 29b, the top line. Amar Rab Tanchum. Rab Tanchum said, in the name of Rav Asi, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Amar Rab Tanchum, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Yeshua ben Levi. Ta'ah, if a person made a mistake, and he forgot to mention the Yalav Yavai, the mention of Rosh Chodesh is an addition that we say on the first day of the month, which is called Yalav Yavai. If a person forgot to mention it in the Avodah blessing of Avodah is Ritzei. Ritzei is that we ask Hashem that He should want our service, and so in that blessing, at the end of the first paragraph, we generally we're supposed to at the include a mention of Rosh Chodesh on the day of Rosh Chodesh. And the same thing as for holidays. We also mention the same Yalav Yavai, and we insert a different words for the holidays. But the Gemara is here mentioning for Rosh Chodesh, a person made a mistake. He forgot to include the Rosh Chodesh in Avodah. Choizer la'avodah. He goes back to Avodah. What does that mean? He goes back to Avodah. He goes back, and let's say he already said Moedim. He already went a page ahead. So the thing is, he missed out Rosh Chodesh. He's got to go back. So go back to the blessing where you missed it, Ritzei, and you include it over there. Nizkar b'haidah. If you remembered when you were in the middle of the haidah, which is the thanks. So in other words, you already said moedim. Choizer li'avodah. You go back to Ritzei. What happens if you're in Sim Shalom? You already went to 3 pages forward. The Sim Shalom. Choizer li'avodah. You got to go back to Ritzei. Vim siyem choizer l'roish. Now, what happens if you finish the whole Shemana Esrei? You finish the whole Shemana Esrei. What do you do then? Can you go back to? Can you just go back, or do you need to start all over the Shemana Esrei? So the law is choizer l'roish. You got to start all over from the beginning, and that is with regard to forgetting Yalav Yavai. Forgot to include something for Rosh Chodesh, but before we answer questions, I just want to mention there's a few other laws here. So let me just read it inside, and then we'll answer questions. So just hold on one more minute. Amarav Papa Bereder Rav Acha bar Ado. This Rav Papa said, the son of Rav Acha, son of Ado, Hadei Amaron Siem Choizer l'roish. This that we say that if you finish, you go back to the beginning. That only applies if you went backwards. You moved your feet out of the Shemona Esrei stand. You've removed your feet out of the Shemona Esrei stand. So in that case,
Oh my gosh.
You would need to go back. But Ava Loyaka Raglov, if a person did not move their feet out of the Shemana Esrei, Choizer li'avodah, they can go back to Ritzei, and it's not called they finished. Again, the Gemara is discussing what is really called finished. When you finish Shemana Esrei, then you got to start all over if you missed Yalav Yavai. But what is called finishing? And that's what the Gemara is going to be dealing with over here. And what we mentioned here is that only if you move back from your stand, you were standing, Shemana Esrei, the Amidah, you were standing with your feet together, and you finished the entire Shemona Esrei, and now you're walking backwards as is customary to do after you recite the Shemona Esrei. So if you took your steps back, then that's called finishing. But if you didn't take your steps back, you can go back to Ritzei. Now the Gemara will qualify this statement soon, so I'm just going to stop there to answer some questions, but don't think that that's the final halach. Yes, Ezra. You're muted.
All right. So let's say you got to Sim Shalom and you realize you forgot to do that. So it says you go back to let's say, but then do you have to continue from let's say on forward,
Yeah.
or do you as if the rest of the things that you already said don't matter or they don't count?
Correct. Everything has to be in order. Yep.
Okay. So what happens to those prayers?
So you want to know if they're called a bracha levatala.
Yes.
And the difference, if it's called a bracha levatala or not, is do you need to do tshuva for it, or can it be counted as 100 brachas every day? Can you count it into your 100 brachas every day? Because the fact is, you said a bracha. So is it called a bracha levatala? And if not, maybe there's room to say it's not a bracha levatala, and maybe you could even include it in your 100 brachas. You need to say, of course, it's not preferable to do it this way. It's called a bracha she'eina tzricha, but it's still a bracha. You said a bracha. So the answer to that question is the difference of two opinions. On Tosfos, on page 26b, there were two opinions in Tosfos. One opinion was that when you miss Yalav Yavai, your Shemona Esrei is a good Shemona Esrei, but you still gotta do another one because you need a Shemona Esrei with a Yalav Yavai. So according to that, your blessings were good, but you needed to go back to do more blessings, which would imply like your blessings are good. It's not a bracha levatala. Now, the other opinion is that no, it's worthless. Whatever you said, when you missed it, it's worthless. And therefore, it is a bracha levatala. And therefore, when you go back, you're actually you're finally now saying the proper Shemona Esrei. So this would depend on those two opinions in that previous Tosfos. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Susan.
When you start doing your davening, you don't intend to make a mistake. It's an accident. It's not an intention. It's not in your heart. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
And how can you say that the blessings you said in the wrong order don't mean anything? How can that be?
Well, because the fact is that the rabbis established a certain set of way things have to be done, and based on very they made a rule, and they decreed
correct?
That
it's
this
a rabbinic rule.
Yeah, but the rabbinic rules are very important, and if a person did it wrong, they got to do it again, and the rabbis explain what the obligation is. Right. And if a person didn't follow that properly, it's as if it's not good. I'll give you an example. Someone called me yesterday and they told me, I have a pair of tefillin that I lost my tefillin, and I've been using this pair of tefillin, but I don't really think they're kosher. So I told him, I said, listen, if they're not kosher tefillin, it's as if you did not put tefillin on.
Right.
And he was a little shocked. He thought, oh, I just thought it's just not as good. I didn't know it's not like not put it. I said, no, if they're not kosher, then you didn't put tefillin on. If you messed up in the Shemona Esrei, there are mistakes that make it not called a Shemona Esrei, and it's as if you didn't pray. You got to do it according to the rules.
When you explain it like that, it makes Yeah. When you
Yeah.
explain it like that, I understand it now.
Now,
Yes.
there are cases where there are mistakes that if you make them, it's considered okay, but the other mistakes are not.
Right.
For example, if you forget to say Atochein Antanu, we had the case you forgot to say Havdalah. You're going to make Havdalah later. So you forgot it in the Shemona Esrei, no problem. You're going to recite it later. It's not a problem. Preferably, you should have included it. You didn't. Your Shemona Esrei is fine. You forgot Ya'aleh V'yavai. There are two opinions. One opinion is your prayer is worthless. The other opinion is that no, your prayer is a prayer, but you still need a prayer with the Shemona Esrei.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there are two opinions, but there is room to say that it's worthless.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the little details over here of if a person, what makes a person consider that they finished the Shemona Esrei? Because the law is that if you finish the Shemona Esrei, then you got to start all over to recite Ya'aleh V'yavai. Now we will mention later that this does not apply at night. It only applies during the day, the morning prayer and the afternoon prayer of Rosh Chodesh. The night prayer of Rosh Chodesh, if a person makes a mistake at night on Rosh Chodesh, you do not need to repeat the Shemona Esrei. So this is only applicable during the daytime. Now, the Gemara is trying to figure out when you
Excuse me,
finish.
Rabbi.
Yes.
The night prayer that you mean, is that on the day of Rosh Chodesh or the night before Rosh Chodesh? That at night, the night before Rosh Chodesh, you don't have to repeat it?
There is no night
Erev
before
Rosh Chodesh, no?
that prayer is already Rosh Chodesh. The night before
That's
Rosh
what I mean.
Chodesh is night.
So,
No, that's
okay.
Rosh Chodesh. Yeah, there's no
Right.
such thing
So-
as there's no
so you
night
mean-
before Rosh Chodesh.
okay, so you
That
mean,
night is Rosh Chodesh.
so you mean the day of Rosh Chodesh at night, it's not Rosh Chodesh
The Ma'ariv.
anymore.
The
Ma'ariv.
Ma'ariv prayer of Rosh Chodesh, you do not need to repeat. Where you're supposed to say Ya'aleh V'yavai on the Ma'ariv of Rosh Chodesh, you do not need to repeat it. Again, if today was Rosh Chodesh, last night is also Rosh Chodesh, and you should have recited in Ma'ariv last night,
Right.
Ya'aleh V'yavai. And
Right.
if you didn't, do you need to repeat Shemona Esrei?
Yeah. Okay, so
today
it's
is Rosh
not,
Chodesh.
it's not on the day of Rosh Chodesh. Okay, I mean on the night. Mincha is still Rosh Chodesh, but Ma'ariv is not.
Right. So we're not talking
Okay.
about the
Okay,
Motza'eh.
okay.
I'm not talking about Motza'eh Rosh Chodesh. I'm talking
Yeah.
about Rosh Chodesh itself. So this is
Okay.
the Rosh Chodesh. You're supposed to say Ya'aleh V'yavai. And if a
Right.
person missed out at night, they don't have to repeat it. But here we're talking about where during the day, either Shacharis or Mincha,
Okay.
if a person
you.
missed out. Now, when do you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei? If you finished it. If you didn't finish it, you could go back to Ritzei. But what is called finishing Shemona Esrei? So our Gemara started out saying that it depends what's called finishing. If you took steps backwards, you know how people take 3 steps back after they finish the Amidah. So if you took your steps backward, that is what's called finishing. And once you take those steps backwards, that's called that. Then you got to start all over Shemona Esrei. So the Gemara says, Amar Lei. Rav Tanchum said back to Rav Papa, Minolacha, how do you know, from where do you have this point that the end of Shemona Esrei is when you take your steps backwards? Omar Le may Abba Marish Neil. So he said, I heard it from my father, my teacher. The Abba Mari may Rav. And my father, my teacher, heard it from Rav. So this is how he knows this. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Now, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, Hadi Amaran Okaragla. This that it said, that we said, if a person takes their steps backwards, they uprooted their feet from their position of the Amidah, Choizer LaRoche, then you got to go all the way back to the beginning and start Shemona Esrei over if you forgot to add in the paragraph of Rosh Chodesh. If you forgot that, you got to go to the back. This that we said that if you took your steps, if you uprooted your feet, you got to go all the way back to the beginning. Loi Amaran, it was only said, that's only if you're not used to reciting an additional requests after the Shemona Esrei. But a person who usually asks, requests after their tefillah, choizer la'avodah. They do go back to avodah. Now, what do? We recite a whole paragraph of Elokai Netzar. So we normally say a whole extra paragraph. Now, if a person wasn't used to saying this paragraph of Elokai Netzar, there's an extra paragraph after Sim Shalom. After the final blessing, there's an extra paragraph. Now, the custom is, the tradition is to recite it. If a person is not used to reciting it, so when he finishes his prayer, that's when he goes back. But if a person normally says it,
go back, you have Hamavarach Samo Yisrael Bashalom, and then what do? You go Osa Shalom B'Rayma.
The people who don't say
part of the Elokai Netzar.
You're saying the people who don't say the Tachnunim.
Elokai Netzar.
I would guess they don't say any of it. They just
step back.
Step back. So, for people who are used to saying the Akar Raglov, you go back. That's only if you're not used to reciting a prayer. But if a person normally says Elokai Netzar, then you're still part of Shemona Esrei when you're saying that prayer. Now, what the Gemara implies is people used to say Elokai Netzar after they took steps back. And still, you return to Ritzei because you're still in the middle of your Shemona Esrei. Now, Ika Diamri, some say, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, that Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak worded his statement a little differently. Hadi Amaron, this that we said, that when you don't take your steps back, you can return to Ritzei. That's only if you are used to saying the Tachnunim after your tefillah, that when you don't take the steps back, you can go to Ritzei. But if you don't normally recite prayers after your Shemona Esrei, then it's Choizer L'Rosh. Then you got to go back to the beginning again. The final statement of Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is that if you didn't take your steps back, you go back to Avodah. That is referring to the person who's going to be reciting more prayers. You didn't take your steps back. You go to Avodah. That's a person who's going to recite more prayers. They can go back to Ritzei if they missed this paragraph. But if a person doesn't say any more prayers, even if you didn't take your steps back, you got to start all over because you finished your Shemona Esrei. So it all boils down to if you finished your Shemona Esrei, you have to start all over. If you didn't finish, then you can go to Ritzei and just go a few pages backwards. But what does it mean finishing? So the first opinion was that finishing was you took your steps back, referring to a person who doesn't say the prayers afterwards. But a person who normally says prayers extra addition attached to the Shemona Esrei, a person who normally says that, then he still he can still go back 3 pages, doesn't have to start all over. But the other opinion is that you before you go back your steps, if you finish Shemona Esrei, it's over. So it's, in other words, once you take those steps back, for sure it's over. But even if you didn't take the steps back, if you finish Shemona Esrei and you're not going to say anymore, it's over. You got to start all over again. If you're still going to say Tachnunim, then you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning. You could still go back to Ritzei. So the conclusion, at least according to the second way of the way he reads it, is that if you finished the blessing, Hamavarech Hasam Yisrael Bashalom, can you go back to Ritzei now and say, "Oi, I forgot Yalav Yava. I just want to go back 2 pages, 3 pages. I don't want to go all the way to the beginning." What do? So, because we normally say Elokai Netzar, you can go back to Ritzei. But if a person normally skipped out that last paragraph in the Shemona Esrei, it would be too late. They would have to go to the beginning of Shemona Esrei. Okay, that concludes this Gemara. I know it's a little confusing, but that's the conclusion of this little piece. And Mitzvah Hashem, tomorrow we'll try to go over it. Yes, David.
There's a situation where a person has a child that has to use the bathroom and needs help. So a person can move their feet and step out of Shemona Esrei and help the child with the bathroom and then come back and step right back to where he was. Mm-hmm. So it's not only the moving of the feet, there's something else going on there where it's allowable. I'm sure most fathers with children have asked this question: what if my child has to really use the bathroom and I'm in the middle of Shemona Esrei?
Right. So the conclusion is that it's not really the actual moving of the feet. It's finishing the Shemona Esrei. That's the conclusion. Was that you, Isaac?
Tomorrow, right?
Who just mentioned something? What?
We're going to come back and talk about this tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll talk a little about it tomorrow, Mr. Hashem. Okay. Yes, Moshe.
The completion before Rotzi, when you step back 3 steps and then you turn to the right. I mean, you turn to the left and then to the right and then bow. Is that really the completion? I mean, you're saying 3 steps back and it's over. You still have to turn to the left and then to the right and then bow. Isn't that the completion?
So the wording of the Gemara is uprooting your feet. Once you uproot your feet, but it really is before that. It really is when you finish your recital of the Yiyu L'Ratzon Imrei Fi, the second time. Once you say that, it's basically over. Your Shemona Esrei is over, and there is no you're over. But if you didn't go back, so it ends up being basically when you move your feet back. But it just happens to be that if you didn't move your feet back and you finished everything, it's already too late.
Well, so someone who loses their balance, they say, they completed it,
Well, we're not talking about someone who lost their balance and moved their feet. Moving their feet.
More define it to the completion would be turning to the left and then to the right and then bowing.
No,
that would completion.
It's before you get to there. You're already finished.
I see.